July 11th at 6:34 p.m. All right, roll call, please.
Mrs. Butlinski?
Here.
Mr. Gadanis?
Here.
Dr. Long?
Here.
Mrs. McLean?
Present.
Mr. Nordmark? Mrs. Peters?
Present.
Mr. Novak?
All right. Pledge of allegiance.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Recognition of visitors and participation. At each regular and special open meeting, members of the public and district employees may comment on or ask questions of the Board of Education. If you'd like to address the board, please complete the pink form and give it to Mrs. O'Donnell, our recording secretary. We do not appear to have any comments tonight. All right. And so I think with that, we move to communications.
Yes, we are excited to once again be recipients of an award from the National School Public Relations Association. And many thanks really to Chris Alms, our Director of Communications. We received an honorable mention award nationally for our at-bat and home run social media campaign that we ran last year in connection to our baseball themed year. The at-bats were recognizing staff as they joined our district, and the home runs were recognitions of both from peers to peers as well as from parents to staff, recognizing when they did something that was above and beyond.
How do you go from honorable mention to the next? No clue.
We put in our best application, and we hope that we win. We won the award last year for our newsletter campaigns. The group, the number of districts that are recognized nationally varies every year. This year we're using our Olympics theme, carrying the torch for District 23. And so our new hires are carrying the torch. And so we've been introducing staff as they've been onboarded. And throughout the year we'll do gold medal award kind of a theme for the same kind of recognition. So thanks to Chris and congratulations again for the honor.
If you need to get like an obligatory bronze, right, you just give that to me, right?
Yeah, I was
or
gonna say,
I'm
doing
disqualified,
it,
right?
Hey, it's better than getting no medal, right?
A participation trophy.
Yeah, bronze is above that though.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. No, thank you, Chris. That's a really cool honor to have done that. Did they is there a site that just shows all the different districts and stuff and all the different things?
Yeah, so they have a site because there are different categories for which you apply, and we worked with our partner Jenny Kuster-Quinn to do that because she's been really supportive of our efforts, and we did take some notes for kind of what the submission details are, because we'll look at doing the same thing for the carrying the torch, and not because we want the recognition isn't for us, it's really for the staff to say, hey, what you do is at such a high level, we want to recognize you with this.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Thank you.
All right. Committee reports?
Yep.
All right, committee reports. First is NSSCO. Carol?
Nothing to report, there's no meeting
Oh,
Is it
okay.
me?
summer, so.
Okay. Policy. Becky.
We had a great meeting. It was very quick. There's in your packet tonight is first reads, so nothing huge to talk about. Rumor is that we'll be meeting again in the next couple of weeks because there's another policy packet coming down the pipeline. So first read tonight for all of the policies, so nothing really to talk about. Lots of footnote
Legal
changes like
footnotes.
always. Anything to add, Spencer, that I missed? It was
No,
quick.
there's nothing new, a lot of just name changes for positions and things like that, so it was nothing.
Easy peasy.
right, community relations, I have that, so then we met Monday. We ran through a bunch of different things, I think first was like the different construction videos, right, if you've seen, the series of those, featuring Hard Hat Don. And,
One person wear a hard hat. You were afraid.
I've gotten so much traction out of the hat. People are like, I love that you're wearing the hat at the parade. And then some of them are like, why are you wearing the hat? When like the next one that's coming out, Craig and I are doing, it's about curriculum, and I'm still wearing the hat. So I'm like, I don't know, it's a thing now.
It's gonna be Don the Builder. And then we do look forward to the director's cut of those videos where
Yes.
Amy, we actually get to see Amy's performances that keep getting edited out.
She got clipped out of the last
we also spent some time talking about, potential, this would be kind of a future thing, but talking, potentially having someone assisting, the district and, and district advocates for, for supporting a referendum. I think that'd be something, if that's a path that the district goes, that would be something that we talk further about and discuss in the full board. We did, referencing what Chris just talked about, that we did talk about, renewing Jenny Quinn's contract. Got an update on registration. It seems like it's going pretty well. Don had talked about this, schedules getting together, right, already for back to school, right, with walkthroughs for elementary kids. The pre-K and EC play date has been kind of an annual thing for the last several years. That's really neat. And then the Fall Family Fest will be on September 20th, that's a third year for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And then I think that then maybe the last thing that we talked about was that Don might put out a communication and try to schedule like a one-day event for parents and how to talk to parents about the different ways that they can engage with the district, either via, in classroom activities, PTO activities, the superintendent advisory council, as well as, potentially, being a board member, to kind of talk, just to kind of have an overview for new and, and current parents for the different ways that they can get involved with the district. I think that was the highlights. Anything else?
Plant Your Roots is the only other.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's coming.
Talk about that.
Yeah, our coinciding with the construction, we'll be doing some landscaping, and one way that we can help contribute to beautifying the school is through a Plant Your Roots campaign, where we'll be asking folks to bring annuals. No,
Perennials.
perennials. I kept saying an annual, like you don't have to plant it it comes back every year. It's annual. I know. So the one that you plant once and you leave it and let it go. So hostas and daylilies and whatever, we'll be putting a communication out to families saying, as you're wrapping up your summer and prepping your home for fall, if you're gonna split some of those, they can drop them off as part of the family fest. And then we'll have our landscape crew plant those. We've got a couple of areas that are designated kind of as a community garden type of space. So just a way to connect the community physically, planting their roots in the district. So more info to come on.
Right, so, and that will be the day of.
The drop off will be the day of the family fest.
So that'll be September 20th.
We anticipate lots of people getting here.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
We're serving some popcorn again.
Yeah, we're planning on it. I thought about snow cones, but I thought, you know what, popcorn is nice, and we can do Kona ice for snow cones. Yeah. So just made the reservations for all of the bouncy houses and
Oh, you were
all
able to
of
get
the
all
slides and everything. I've got it all. We're all set for the 20th. So in process.
And I think that's it for committees, so the consent agenda. Tonight's tonight's consent agenda includes the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting on June 13th, 2024, the personnel report, and the tuition report.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bowenski?
Yes.
Mr. Verdanis?
Yes.
Dr. Long?
Yes.
Mrs. McClaney?
Yes.
Mrs. Peters?
Susie, yes.
All right.
Motion.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. The financial report. I had the bills, right? This was.
You
this
did.
was
Sorry,
all-
this is a tricky
no,
one.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I did not, there's just one thing that and I'm glad that Chris is here. Just the only question I had was that there was one invoice from the MSSP for like an authentication project that was like $25,000. Is that something different than the normal services?
That is, so as we look at our network authentication, we did our bill of services with one company and the implementation cost for another, which was less expensive than if we did it both with the same company. So
I got you.
that's the first half of the implementation
Okay.
service cost.
But then that all comes through MPIS?
Yep,
Or- Okay.
we're doing that's separate from our contract, but they, thanks to our partnership with them, we feel confident in the price and the support.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. So then, I would make a motion to approve the financial report as presented.
I'll second.
Mrs.
Roll call.
Bowenski?
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Verdanis?
Yes.
Dr. Long?
Yes.
Mrs. McClaney?
Yes.
Mrs. Peters?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. And with that, I think that we are ready for the superintendent's report.
Thanks. Yeah, we have two items tonight. The first is the second in a series of our presentations on options for Building a Better D23. So we have a presentation that we will present here tonight, and then it's linked in our school scene that will go out tomorrow. Just again, as a reminder, we are looking at continuing the drive to think long-term while being present and aware of the limitations of the district and our community. That balancing the short-term and the long-term needs is always a little tricky. The board had given us direction to look at 3 different kinds of options. One that we talked last week was the project building an addition at Eisenhower. Looking at that, we saw a referendum option there with construction costs and financing and made a recommendation for one of those options. Tonight we'll talk a little bit about shifting of early childhood here to MacArthur and looking at sort of the impact of that. We'll make a recommendation out of that option, and then in August we will present the third option, which is partnerships with other entities. And we've begun those discussions and have had communications sent out and actually have 2 furthering conversations on the books, one for next week and one for the week after with some of our partners. So there's a couple of things that are at least we didn't get a shut door. We've got a couple of things for us to consider. So we'll pull that together and make a suggestion or recommendation after that presentation as well. So when we think about the need for providing full-day kindergarten, conceptually what we're talking about is freeing up space at Eisenhower so that those students can receive a full-day experience. Minimally, we would need 4 classrooms to accomplish that at Eisenhower, assuming that we're staying within our similar class size guidelines. So what that requires then is for us to find a home for other classrooms. And we selected moving the early childhood program mostly because it's an independent functioning group, and the more that we can keep them together as a team, the better services they'll provide, rather than splitting a grade and putting 4 here and 4 someplace else. The other component for the early childhood team is that because those programs are half-day, they have limited draw or demand on PE and art and music and certainly lunch. So the early childhood spaces that are necessary are really more focused on classroom spaces as opposed to a first grade section or kindergarten sections that will require PE and art and music and lunch in a full day setting.
Don, to follow up on that
Yeah.
statement you just made, do they have requirements of early childhood to have like PE or any of that?
Just motor, they have to have motor daily.
Just a daily motor,
Uh-huh.
so that could look different than
Play trips to the playground, yep.
just asking for.
Right. So the first, sorry, if you could say on option one, so what we identified in looking here at MacArthur were really two scenarios. MacArthur being the largest physical building, also looking at our projection of enrollment, also knowing that the kids are the oldest, the increased class size would be less impactful for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students than it would be increasing class sizes for 2nd and 3rd and 4th grade or 5th grade then. So that's one reason why we looked at MacArthur in terms of utilizing space. And then we looked at two locations in MacArthur. The one that we investigated that we sort of ruled out was this back 7th grade wing. It potentially would work, but doesn't work as well from a flow perspective as does this option that we're presenting. Option one and option two would be taking the furthest west section of the 6th grade hallway and capturing those 4 classrooms. There's an office space there and there's a special education classroom that we're showing sort of to the left of the hallway doors. In this option one, the least impactful in terms of cost is converting those classrooms and offices into the newly purposed spaces and converting some of the stalls and some of the toilets in the lavatory that's in the 6th grade hallway so that they would be appropriately sized for our younger students. So that's sort of at $685,000, that's for really minimal change in the classroom, but really mostly bathroom space. Option two shows the same footprint, but puts shared restrooms and changing tables with each pair of classrooms that we're adding. So that in those spaces there are sinks and restrooms that would allow for privacy and certainly would facilitate changing as some students may need changing as well. So those two options can both fit within the same footprint. Again, obviously the difference in plumbing costs and adding the restroom spaces is what increases this option to 1.1 million.
It still leaves the current full-day classroom at Sullivan as well.
Yeah, both of these options are only to move the four classrooms.
So we would have 8 sections of EC at MacArthur and
One full day.
at Sullivan.
Now, option 3 was a different look. This was a consideration that we had done a couple of years ago as we started into this process. One of the investigations we had among the range of things was an addition at Betsy Ross, or tacking on to that facility. Here again, we had talked about if you add first grade here, there were demands for another cafeteria, for another more of a gym space. Those types of things drive up that cost. So here we, initially, we had looked at that addition that we're talking about at Eisenhower. If something like that were built at Betsy Ross, and our partners at Archon were able to identify that, yes, we have the space, we would be looking at adding something like that on at the south end of Ross. And it, in this layout, shows 8 classrooms, 6 offices, and a multi-purpose room, as well as a little meeting and office, main office space. Again, here you're talking again about all new construction. So this is a bigger classroom footprint, but was at 23.8 million. When we looked at, when we looked at those considerations, just again, as we're looking at what is included and what isn't, this is simply the minimum number of spaces necessary to be able to provide full-day kindergarten by moving early childhood. So there's no expansion of either the kindergarten offerings in terms of section spaces, and no expansion of early childhood to a parent pay option or non-at-risk or special education. Again, we didn't engage the architects and construction in really getting into details like we have with the other project. They just sort of gave us that high level based on square footage. Again, this would be, if we were to pursue an option with any of these 3 options, we would need to begin that process of construction document design, fields verification, to start refining those costs. So they're high level, just sort of placeholder dollar amounts, best guesses, without getting into the construction design documents, as we did with Eisenhower, to help make that more clear and more specific. When we think about the opportunity for moving forward with any of these projects, sort of philosophically, administration was thinking of this as a reality for us going to the community multiple times, or going to the community one time with a successful referendum. And thinking that while we may be able to go to a referendum and only do early childhood move and the staffing for that, there continue to be other non-full day kindergarten related needs for the district in the long term that, again, we're not gonna pass a referendum and then turn back 2 years later and ask for another one. So trying to be responsible about, if we have a lesser ask, as we see, obviously these costs are significantly less, as will be the leasing options. We wanted to be prudent and say, okay, well, what are the projects that we would fold into that referendum ask, just in terms of comparing apples and apples. And so the most important non-full day kindergarten kind of component of the Eisenhower project is the need for the new parking lot. That has been a long-standing need. So we're including that placeholder in this project as well. And then, as we know, we have used our available DSEB for the windows and siding work at Ross, Sullivan, and Grodsky this summer. We would need another 2.5 million for MacArthur, the MacArthur Phase 2 project. If we can roll those funds into this referendum ask, then that gives us that 2.5 DSEB in our pocket for future need. We've had conversations about the what ifs, but you know, if we maximize all of our borrowing power, what do we do if we have needs that arise? So we felt it prudent to include these two projects in the funding. Obviously, doesn't have to be in the final calculation, but for comparison purposes, we wanted to keep and hold those two things constant. Go ahead, Christian, thank you. Additionally, the operational expenses at 1.2 million are the same placeholder that we've had. You know, there are going to be variances, so we don't necessarily need to end at 1.2 million, but we included it just for apples and apples comparison of overall costs. There are some costs that will go down with these moves that we're recommending here, and there are other costs that would increase with these moves due to availability and related services being at multiple locations instead of all at Eisenhower.
Can I just add, Brian had asked a question about what the actual component in the tax impact is. With regard to the 1.2, Brian, it's about $167.
And so holding that steady as a variable, just in terms of comparison of different options, you know, obviously that operational expense can be refined regarding any of the options that we may move forward with. But, you know, again, as the board is well aware, we run an extremely tight budget. We do not have significant funds in reserves, and we've not had a referendum rate increase since 1987. So some of the long-term health of the district is dependent upon an infusion of some additional operational expense, whether it's tied to full day K or pre-K, obviously paying off construction bonds, but also just operational costs for the district that continue to increase.
That 1.2 million, that was the original, that was the same number from the previous referendum, right? And
Right.
that was like, was that like, what
It's
was
like
the number ahead? It was like 18 head
18.
right?
Mhm. And so depending on where and what configuration, there's obviously, you know, fewer teachers needed, but maybe more PE sections or not PE, fewer teachers but more speech and language sections if we have to have speech and language paths at multiple buildings, for example. So there's certainly, the smaller the build or the smaller the end result is, obviously the less demand there is for more teachers and more sections. So you would have the ability to modify that number down to a more targeted level. But again, for comparison, we're trying to just hold those constants so that we're comparing apples and apples.
And then, like, the mechanism by which that happens in the funding, that would be like a one-time bump up, and then for future years, right, that we would be able to that we'd be able to ask for that as part of our annual.
Right.
It would
Yeah,
increase the
raises
rate
that rate.
itself.
Right, so that is, right, so that's kind of like a one-time bump in our total funding,
Right.
right, that would then go along, that would then continue to increase with
Right.
our overall funding increases that we get.
Yeah, and again, assuming one referendum question, because again, as we've discussed before, if we build something but don't pass the operation, or pass the operation and don't have the construction, neither of those singular options really help for us. So looking at a mechanism that asks one question would pay for construction, renovation, staffing, and long-term operational expenses as well. The impact to that, again, at a very high level, comes down to teachers in space. Christian, if you go to the next slide. Oh, no, sorry. So, yeah, you're on the right one. Sorry, I forgot. I was jumping ahead. When we look then at comparing these options, again, we show a 20-year term and a 25-year term. We are holding constant the 1.2 million, and we're holding constant the additional projects, the parking lot and phase 2, at 5.428. And then obviously in the middle column, the cost of construction were shown in those 3 different options. We priced those out for the impact on a $350,000 home, which again is, we've been holding constant. There was one mathematical correction that was made. The option 2A originally in your packet was at 252, and it was at a different rate. And so we identified that as we were reviewing. So it's actually 242 for a $350,000 home.
The 2B was originally 245 in the presentation, so it's 245.
Next slide, please. So the real impact to programming is a reduction of 4 classroom sections at MacArthur. And what that, it does in theory, I mean, again, we always schedule based on the enrollment, but what it would allow us to have as a base are teams of 6 per grade level rather than our current, we have a section at 8 and we have 2 sections at 6 currently. Next year we're projected to have 2 sections of 8 and 1 section of 6 to implement the middle school philosophy. What that looks like in terms of classroom averages, our current classroom average enrollment is 20 to 24, and based on the different enrollment, as we, the numbers in black are the enrollments projected for the next 7 years to come through MacArthur. So you see a range there of, 25 at the low end to 31 at the higher end. Keep in mind, again, those are based on just flat averages. The reality of scheduling is that we, schedule to meet kids' needs, and so certain classes can certainly be higher than that. If you only have 1 section, for example, of 8th grade Spanish, rather than 2, then that obviously is gonna impact the enrollment. We see those fluctuations every year anyway, but just want to keep that in mind as we're looking at these projections. The other impacts are, again, we're sort of shifting some of the problem that we have at Eisenhower with the shared spaces for our service providers, shared office space that we have at Eisenhower. We take some of that away from Eisenhower, but then we see that challenge here at MacArthur, where we would have more folks sharing offices or classroom space. So when we look at that as an administrative team, our thoughts are to pursue option 2A of these. That is the restroom configuration in the classroom so that we have the privacy and changing areas. It does increase, obviously, construction costs to 1.1 million. We also are looking at the 20-year payback rather than the 25-year payback, because the difference was pretty minimal, and rather pay our debt down sooner rather than spread it out and pay more when the differential isn't really all that significant.
So the recommendation from last month, though, was to use the 25.
Was the 25, because it's a bigger dollar amount, and the difference between the two was greater. So here we thought, because there wasn't really that much of a savings, we thought better to pay it down a little bit sooner. We still see that brings our ask from $445 or thereabouts, where we've currently projected, down to $243, so that's a significant $200 reduction in the impact to the taxpayers. And again, this would include both the operational costs as well as Eisenhower parking lot and the MacArthur Phase 2 project. Pros and cons. Oh, this just shows that graphic, sorry. Pros and cons, obviously on the pro side, it provides us those spaces for our current needs. It addresses the outdated parking lot and traffic flow challenges we have at Eisenhower. It is a significant reduction from the original referendum asks and is responsive again to community's request. And the November referendum timeline gives us an August of 2026 open. We would obviously have to start budget planning, hello Bryn, and document design work shortly, as soon as possible after a successful referendum. On the con side, again, as we had last time, that November timeframe, the challenge there is it's going to require quick action with limited time. I think the programmatic change and the long-term, in the long-term view for the district is that puts us really still at capacity, even with those shifts. Doesn't give us any wiggle room for enrollment increases. It certainly doesn't allow us to look at any additional early childhood programming. When we start moving grade levels around, it's a transition away from the philosophy of grade level centers. The negative that we believe the impact to class sizes here at MacArthur are a significant concern. And then we have some other logistics in terms of traffic flow. It doesn't resolve a number of the other issues that we have identified at Eisenhower. Most importantly, the overcrowding and the Eisenhower Library.
Does it then also put, and maybe I'm wrong, a different administrative impact on your administrative teams when you're adding early childhood into a middle school?
Well, part of the 1.2 is for a coordinator in any of those models. So it would be, it's not a principal, but it would be an administrator who would oversee the program regardless of where it's housed. So as you know, just kind of providing some of these high-level options and open it up for any questions or conversation.
On the third proposal, on the difference between 4 classrooms and 8 classrooms. So the Plan 1 had 4 classrooms and then Plan 3 had 8 classrooms. What's the theory behind that?
Yeah, that was just the original.
Oh, it's just a plot of what.
It was just that we wanted to show that we have considered a Ross option. Obviously, if we went with a 4 classroom or a 6 classroom addition at Ross, that cost is going to come significantly down. But at that point, in our thinking, you're comparing a change at Ross or a change at Ike, and the change at Ike allows you to resolve a number of other issues, whereas the solution at Ross would meet a good part of the problem, the challenge in terms of full day K, but it doesn't resolve everything for basically the same price.
I appreciate it. I wasn't here for the last one, so.
Right, and it's been, and we did, I mean, there were a number of other things that we considered. We considered buying new property, we considered building a brand new school in the back. And at the end of the day, the Eisenhower recommendation that came out 2 years ago was the best solution given a number of different variables. It's not the only solution by any stretch, and we wanted to just show that has been an option that we've considered. So sort of in this presentation, we think about if it's not at Eisenhower, if it were at this campus, what would it look like?
I appreciate that.
We had to bring the cost up just.
Yeah.
What it would cost in today's.
if we put first grade at Ross.
First grade there, right?
Mhm.
And this, would you still need 6 additional offices then? If you need first grade over there,
You would need additional offices because you'll be bringing additional related service over, special education services, speech and language, psychologists. You would not have enough capacity within the Ross team to pick up those additional. If you were to make Ross a 3 grade level building, you would have to increase some of that staffing and provide them some space. The bigger expense would be the impact on PE, lunch, those types of things that are not. I mean, we have a generic multi-purpose room, but if we're going to bring first grade over, or even if we brought kindergarten, it would be full day. You know, then you've got that middle of the day. You have to provide lunch and more of those ancillary supports aren't using that aren't a part when you bring just early child.
This is also probably a terrible hypothetical question, but I'm gonna ask it. What's the long-term impact to MacArthur with Plan 2 if those bathrooms are in that space and the future goes back to being middle school again? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you have to work around the logistics of that, but I wouldn't imagine you would spend the money to remove those restrooms. They would just eat into the footprint of that classroom.
Thank you.
For that raw solution where we're kind of building at the south end there, like over the existing blacktop and playground.
Yeah.
right? Further north in the building, kind of like between like the between the second grade wing and the gym, there's
Yeah.
it's almost like an alcove, right, or like an area there.
Yeah.
You cannot build in there.
We asked them to look at that. Their concern is that it begins to infringe upon the geothermal field. Anything that comes further west, you start. So there could be, I'm sure, a number of ways to make a longer, narrow hallway that fits somewhere in there. But in terms of their design options, that was the best use of our current footprint that they recommend. And I mean, from my perspective, there's nothing bad about the Ross option. It's that I believe Eisenhower is a better option because it resolves a number of other issues that we have. That 23 obviously is, you would add on the 5 to do the parking lot and MacArthur. Obviously you don't have to add the MacArthur piece, but it wouldn't resolve the parking lot at Eisenhower in and of itself, so you'd have to add those costs on. It doesn't do anything for overcrowding at Eisenhower in terms of office space. It doesn't do anything for the library renovation, so or the office or the nurse's office or any number of those other components that we looked at. Whereas an addition at Eisenhower would address both. So it's not anything to say that, you know, building an addition at Ike is or at Ross is a bad idea. It's just for the cost, you're able to accomplish your full day K, keep the grade level center configuration, and address the number of Eisenhower issues as well.
Yeah, just the other, like we've talked about this before, right? Like, just all things being equal, right? I would much rather be building on this campus than be putting money into Eisenhower. But there
Right.
are so many needs at Eisenhower, right? That you're getting more for your dollar there. And then I think just the one other thing that you didn't mention apart from all of it is that we finally solved, right, all the traffic issues here,
Yeah.
right? All the problems, right? And then adding 180 6-year-olds, right, is going to reintroduce
Right.
more issues there, right? And so,
And the Eisenhower, or the configuration of early childhood at the west end, there is an entrance that can be dedicated just to early childhood. There is a bit of a loop, it's tight, There's a bit of a loop that our buses for the childhood students could navigate, that parents could pick up and drop off from their own location. So that doesn't impact the traffic flow as negatively, especially if we offload them. But you have to get through the rest of the parking lot to get there.
But don't they, wouldn't we have them at a different start time?
It would be a little bit different there. It would actually coincide. Right now it's a 10-minute difference. We would have to look at that, but we would likely likely coincide with Ross Sullivan pickup drop off. The other we did look at, and this goes back to 2019, 2020, when we first started, we actually did look at what if we no longer invested in Eisenhower, sold that property, and then built here or built on, and the assessment at the time was that property was too valuable to us. We had already invested, it wasn't run down enough, and it's not in, disrepair that you could bail on it. It's a good school, and the bones of it are fine, and the way that we have invested in all the mechanical systems, to walk away from that, and we wouldn't just get that return on investment there that would make it worthwhile to build here. So that was a whole different idea that we had explored.
I think the thing that I would like when you look at this table, right? Just to me earlier today, I was like, okay, so 685,000 is 236, but then 24,000 is 453, and this was I think the important thing is this number is big, right? So this number alone, right, is $170 a year, right? So there's this base number of 167 a year, right? So that this is actually this 236, right? The construction costs are only $60 of this, right? Where the vast majority of that number is actually in that 18 people, right? That 1.2 would probably actually come down.
Yeah.
But I think when you're looking through, when you just look at this and the numbers don't make sense, but that 1.2 million, there's this big fixed cost there, right? That you have to have in the back of your head when you're comparing these.
And if you really look just at that middle column, it doesn't make sense for the district to only go out and borrow an additional 1.1 million and go through a referendum ask, knowing that it still leaves the district with significant facility needs and operational cost needs. Yes, could we squeeze 4 classrooms in and modify it for $700,000? Yes, but that puts us almost in a worse position than we're in currently and doing nothing, because we know the long-term needs of the district are for parking lot, for siding, for restrooms, for flooring, for roofs eventually in the next cycle, and then we know that our operational costs continue to increase. So considering multiple factors, I think the long-term vision for the board has to be, how do we solve today's problem without spiting our future, cutting off our nose to spite our face, so that the next board in another 7 years is we're out of space, we need more classrooms, and then they try to go back to the community after already a challenging referendum ask. It's been since '87, and I think so if that's any indication, and we know we went into this certainly eyes wide open that it was going to be a difficult ask, and I think for me, when I look at it through the political lens, I say, yeah, we were unsuccessful both of the last 2 times, but it was not 90-10 unsuccessful, which is what a lot of folks said. Oh, you'll never get it passed. Well, 60-40, that's not a resounding, overwhelming, don't do this. It indicates that there's some concern, obviously, cost being primarily the driver. So how can we be responsive and try to find what will maximize the district's capacity without overburdening taxpayers?
update on the full day, on the ISBO, the ISB, full day kindergarten work group?
I do. They are going to be releasing their report in mid-July. I haven't seen it yet. We're at mid-July.
I saw it, I think it's out. I saw something, there's like 100-page PDF on their site.
Oh.
No, it's not 100, it's not I actually just checked it this afternoon, there's something there.
Okay, I
Maybe
didn't,
that's
I
like,
didn't
maybe
check
that's
this
like a
afternoon, but
preliminary
that's
draft.
probably it, yeah. They did not have a quorum when we met earlier, when they met earlier, to approve it, so was submitted on time to the state superintendent. He obviously received it, and then after he receives it, he would make it public, so, I didn't check it today, so if it came out today, then we can take a look at that. My understanding is that there's nothing in that is, really all that enlightening.
I saw it. The data is interesting, and I think there needs to be some clear, how did you get this data and how did you decide on that? Like what caveats go to that? Like, I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to have a little coffee chat about it, cause it's interesting what they put out.
What type of data?
Just about like student growth data based on like if schools that had full day kindergarten versus not full day kindergarten, like if what their ELA data looked like in third grade and their math data looked like in third grade. I think my question when I looked at it is, you had COVID in there, so did you account for the COVID loss? What are the districts that had full day kindergarten versus non-full day kindergarten? What is the community like in those? So on the districts that have half day kindergarten, are those parents paying for another half a day for like enrichment and like, are they accounting for all of that? Like what's skewing your data? Cause it looks, I don't know, it doesn't look great for a full day kindergarten based on the data that's there,
Right.
so. Like what's skewing your data to show it? It's just interesting. I'd like to learn more.
Well,
Yeah, but
my overarching concern about the data set is, again, it's gathered via survey. And so, when I received it, and I chose, we met as a team, we talked about the questions, we formulated our responses together based on how we interpreted the question and what data we had available. 900 and something school districts in the state of Illinois.
I'll interpret that.
If people interpret them differently, if people participate or don't, that to me is the challenge with the survey method of this data collection. And it's
I
just,
don't understand why are they collecting this type of data when they've made their decision?
Right.
well, right,
I don't get it.
the legislators didn't have that data when they made their decision. Then they kicked it to ISB to say, well, get us the data and tell us what the impact of this is. I don't know that now that they see the impact, that'll change their legislative directive. It didn't enlighten anything. Districts that don't provide it have reasons why they haven't been able to provide it. Most of them are space and personnel limitations and tax limitations, or funding limitations. That's no surprise to anybody following the story. So I don't know that at the end of the day, that exercise is going to result in any new information. It's just, they didn't have that information when that legislation was passed. They may go back and look at modifying it. The rules have not yet been developed on that. We did meet with Mary Beth Canty, last week, had a nice conversation. I met with, it was Mary Gore, and I was thinking it was Amy, because she's my sidekick when we go on these visits, but it was with Mary Gore from District 57. We met with Mary Beth Canty, and both, because we're in similar situations as districts, shared our concerns, shared our plan, and tried to hear, and at this point, they're she was still waiting to hear results of the, task force to determine if or what next steps they're going to be.
I mean, it sounds like there's gonna be another report in January, but
Yeah.
it seemed like a book report. But it wasn't really clear what their, you know, what call to action there was from this, right? It was like, yeah, we're gonna keep looking at this and maybe make some recommendations about how districts can continue to get waivers, right? Or what the criteria would be for waivers, but, you know, just the data that Becky was referencing is that when they pulled proficiency data, half-day kindergarten far outperforms full-day kindergarten, right? Like it's striking, right? Like how much better it is, but it's really skewed because
Yeah.
it's 92%, right?
Yeah.
Full-day kindergarten, and then
Yeah.
like 8% half-day.
It's a much
But it's
smaller-
a weird data set that they're kind of showing. It's just like, well, I could look at this page and say there's absolutely no rationale at all for full-day kindergarten because of just the striking difference in this. But
Right.
I think that most of the districts that are half-day are kind of concentrated around the suburbs up here.
And all of the districts, all of CPS offers full-day kindergarten already.
Exactly. And so
And
it's,
so that alone can skew the data
Yeah.
because all of CPS data is included on that.
yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Yeah,
yes,
I figured
full-day
that
kindergarten.
you know, the districts where people don't have, you know,
Yeah.
where they're starting from being much further behind, right,
Yeah.
is in there too.
And the
So you
funding
can't really tell.
the funding recommendations, I mean, again, that's not a surprise that districts that don't would say, yes, if you'll help us, that would certainly make it easier if you would do a matching grant or if you would do any kind of assistance. But all of those school districts that funded it without that support are gonna oppose that kind of action, cause like, well, we did full day K without matching grants or whatever, so it ends up becoming, you know, it's not an argument that anybody didn't see coming, but it isn't likely that that kind of legislation would get through because it's, at its face, is already imbalanced, yeah.
You had also mentioned the last couple of months that there was this potential legislative opportunity where you could do a rate increase without
Yeah,
actually putting a referendum out to vote.
Correct.
What is that something real?
it is, and I haven't investigated it too closely, AIM chime in.
Yeah.
What it did was it said if you were maxed out on your DSEP, instead of having to go out to the community and say, hey, we'd like to increase our borrowing capacity, you can increase your borrowing capacity so long as you have fund balances to pay off that new cost. So districts that have significant fund balances can extend more debt without going for referendum. So for us, great, thank you, we could extend more debt, but we don't have the fund balance and revenue to pay. So it really doesn't help us.
And from what we're understanding is for standalone facilities only, it is not for additionals
Or renovation.
or renovations, right?
So it helps in certain scenarios. It's a step in the right direction in terms of, my opinion, in terms of providing some flexibility for districts that are just, I mean, we're in a position where we only have certain finite number of paths. We have our current revenue, and we can either operate within that current revenue, and if we're adding, then we have to take away or have other reductions to match, or we look to increase revenue. Really our two options. And so we're trying to find some opportunities here to maximize that enhancement to the long-term health of the district without overburdening our constituents. So when we meet again in August, we'll present again a similar, we won't have dollar amounts and I won't be able to share specifics of which partners for their confidentiality as well. But we'll be looking at estimated costs for leasing if there are opportunities that come to fruition. Like I said, I'm glad that I can tell you today that I have at least 2 potential discussions going on. The other responses that we've received have all been, wish we could help, but we don't have space either. And I'll report out on the numbers of different entities that we've reached out to. Privately or offline, I can obviously share, but I don't want to publicly disclose other entities' information.
Did Mount Prospect make a decision about what they're doing?
Not that I'm aware of yet. I know they're finished, kind of wrapped up their community conversations.
Are there any other government entities that you know of, like that would be in our?
In the
Constituents,
Within the Prospect Heights.
that would be in the Prospect Heights area, that would be doing anything?
I don't. Yeah,
For Prospect Heights Partnership?
not that I'm aware of or at liberty to publicly share. Because I don't think they've taken any public action.
I was certainly sick and hear about all of it.
That's
For sure,
Yeah.
so.
Because I think you would, when back to community relations, things open up sooner, like the petitions and everything to get on the ballot. Oh, that's, oh, never mind.
Yeah, that's right.
Never mind, I'm ahead of myself, sorry.
Good.
Alright, next up.
Anybody have it? Any more questions or any?
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, that was great.
All right, enrollment staff interview?
Yeah, so the next, I don't have a presentation on this, so, in the board packet was the memo regarding enrollment and staffing. Really we're in pretty good shape, we're in very similar shape to where we've been in the past, which is part of the reason why I'm a little bit anxious and recommending this move. Still see our MacArthur families lagging in registration. Still, they always, for whatever reason, I don't know if they just assume their kids are coming back. It's almost inverse, like the older the kids get, the lower the percentage of
Forget about
registration
them.
completion is.
It's a bigger dollar amount.
Yeah, but having said that, you know, again, registration numbers are pretty much where we thought they would be. Second grade currently is at class size averages of 24. And the reason that gives me anxiety is because we typically see between now and the beginning of the year a significant influx of move-ins across all the grade levels. And when you look at all the other grade levels, we've got room to absorb some increases. We're about 3 kids away from being at 20 sections of 25 in second grade. Is that right? 51. We need to be at 55. We're 4 kids away. And then that really starts to bump us up. The other reason for the recommendation is, you know, before we get to a critical point and then have to make a decision later, that would be significantly disruptive because then you have to resection everybody, and kids that were teachers that already got preliminary class lists have to change, and kids who thought they were with this teacher are now moved to a different teacher. So our recommendation is to move forward with adding a second grade teacher that would allow us to, that would bring our current class sizes down to 20, which is in alignment. And then obviously as we add more, we would have a little bit room there to absorb. We do have the space at Ross for that additional section. The funding side of that, I'm also recommending that we eliminate the building, long-term building subs. It's not so much the savings on substitute work, because that we're gonna have to pay in a different way. But as the board's aware, the current positions also receive benefits. And so the savings from those benefits costs would free up the funding necessary to add a second grade section. So that's the recommendation there. We're outside of that position. Our certified folks are fully interviewed and hired. You'll be getting those in the next personnel report as well. Much thanks to Dr. Sroka and the team. They've done a lot of interviewing. We do still have some vacancies in our paraprofessional, educational support professionals that are currently being interviewed as well, but we're on pace to post and hire for that second grade position, and then we should be set for the next school year already. So that's a good place for us to be.
So the 4 full-time subs, are those positions that get ripped each spring and then it's up to us to hire them back? I assume that's
Yeah,
what that-
right. They're not RIFT per se, but they're hired as a one-year contract.
So, okay.
So they were notified at the end of last school year. I sent them something that this was on the agenda for tonight, so they're aware. They have opportunity to apply to be a parapro in the district if they're interested. So, because they're good people, we don't want to, lose them. But that particular role, I think, is a very nice thing to have, and it certainly has proven to be helpful. But when money is tight, we have to make some decisions, and that's why that's my recommendation is, maybe at some point in the future, but for now, I would feel the need is greater in that second grade classroom than having full-time subs.
I'll make a motion to eliminate the permanent building sub positions and add a second grade position.
I'll second.
Mrs. Bolinski?
Yes.
Mr. Grodanis?
Yes.
Dr. Long?
Yes.
Mrs. McClaney?
Yes.
Mr. Nordmark?
Yes.
Mrs. Peters?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. All right, old business?
Old business. Becky also spent some time reviewing executive session minutes.
I did indeed. It was enthralling and amazing, like always. But all of the executive session minutes, I can go ahead and make the motion. Can be made available for public, because there's nothing confidential to keep in there. So I move that the executive session minutes from January 11th, February 8th, March 14th, and April 11th, 2024 be made available for public inspection, as they no longer require confidential treatment, and that the executive session recordings dated 18 months and older can be destroyed.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bolinski?
Yes.
Mr. Grodanis?
Yes.
Dr. Long?
Yes.
Mrs. McClaney?
Yes.
Mr. Nordmark?
Yes.
Mrs. Peters?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Sorry. Staring off into space.
Becky?
What?
Who seconded?
Marilyn.
Mary Linda.
Thank you.
All right, new business policy time.
Yeah, as Becky mentioned, we did meet and are presenting these policies for first read. There were only 2 of substance, many 5-year reviews, many just footnote legal updates and so forth. Policy 5200 is a legal update that requires prioritization of hiring PE, music, and art teachers who actually hold those endorsements, which we already meet, but thought that was interesting that wasn't already a requirement. And as Becky said, the rest are pretty perfunctory. Chris,
Wow.
you like that word?
I'm very impressed.
I mean, the only one we really talked at great length about was the at-risk students for academic failure and dropping it, like what happens when kids are at risk for academic failure and
we're already doing all these things, so.
That was the only one we really talked
I
about.
asked a lot because I'm like, do we even need to worry about this, cause we're not really graduating kids, but Don went to a lot of that to help me understand.
Graduation, no, but
Yeah. Other
promotion,
things,
yes.
Were there a lot of changes to the existing?
No,
program?
no, it's just my lack of awareness, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
more.
But that was a 5-year review? Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Just led to some nice conversation on
Yeah.
Monday morning.
It talks about our MTSS process and our teams that review student data and the interventions that are put in place and progress monitoring those students, so we've got a lot of good safety pieces in place to help prevent that from being a necessity. So these will be brought back, for discussion and action next month, and if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer any or chat with you about it here.
All right, do we need an executive session?
No, it's just on there in case.
Okay. Well, I guess unless there's anything else, then I think we're ready to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn. I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Betwinsky?
Yes.
Mr. Grodanis?
Yes.
Dr. Long?
Yes.
Mrs. McClaney?
Yes.
Mr. Nordbaum?
Yes.